Big win. President Donald Trump signs into law a $1.5 trillion tax overhaul package before heading south for Christmas. We have his final remarks before the holiday. President's Council. We talked to Mercedes Schlapp, a senior advisor to the White House and a committed Catholic. The Rosary Priest. Father Patrick Payton takes a step closer to sainthood. We talk with someone who knew him. And in the spirit, we show you more nativity scenes, including some from our own newsroom. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, December 22nd, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. President Donald Trump signs into law a $1.5 trillion tax overhaul package. He touted the size of the tax cut and declared to reporters the numbers will speak.
So we won't do the whole thing, but this is basically what it is.
The tax package is the first major overhaul of the nation's tax laws since 1986. Politically, it marks the Republicans' first major legislative accomplishment of Trump's presidency. The president also signs a temporary spending bill into law. It keeps the government funded through January 19th. Congress has a full agenda when it returns from the holiday break. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says the tax package has brought Republicans together.
We work together seamlessly, and I think we go into the new year with a high level of confidence in our ability to work together with the administration and to have similar priorities.
McConnell says he is committed to bringing immigration legislation to the Senate floor if a bipartisan group of senators can reach an agreement. He'll meet with the president and House Speaker Paul Ryan in early January to discuss next year's agenda. Republican leaders are talking 2018, but Democrats are focused on the question of whether the Trump campaign colluded with the Russians during the campaign. The president's opponents are not letting the issue go quietly. Senator Mark Warner, a Democrat from Virginia, says he is concerned about possible attempts by the president or his allies to shut down special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into possible collusion. The White House has denied the allegations. We're joined by Kelly Cohen, a criminal justice reporter at the Washington Examiner, for more analysis. Kelly, Republicans are hoping to move on from the Russia probe and all of the accusations, but Democrats are still bringing it up. What can we expect in 2018?
I think it's going to keep going as long as, you know, there are people to be interviewed, documents to be had. I think it's going to keep going. And I think Republicans, they want to move on from it, but the Democrats don't want to. And I think there are some Republicans that want to get, you know, they want to get answers and they want to get the closure. And so I think you're going to keep hearing about it. And it's always going to kind of be nagging, especially with there's multiple congressional committees, and then we also have the special counsel. So I think if maybe there was just one investigation, it might, you know, falter. But because there's so many investigations, it's going to keep going for a little bit of time.
Of course, the other thing that's making headlines is alleged bias in the FBI. First off, explain the accusations against the FBI, and do you think there's anything valid to them?
Well, that stems back from the Hillary Clinton investigation. So there actually was someone on special counsel Robert Mueller's team that was part of the Hillary Clinton investigation. You know, he was an FBI agent, top of the top. And then he moved over to Mueller's team this summer, and then these text messages came out between him and his alleged mistress where they were kind of like, oh my God, Trump's going to become president. Yikes. You know, we got to figure out how to battle this. What should we do? And so those text messages just came out within the past week or so. And that kind of just added fuel to Republicans' fire. You know, there's bias in the FBI because, you know, he and she worked in the FBI before during the Clinton investigation. And now there's bias in the Mueller investigation because they were on it. So they've been since removed from the Mueller investigation. And they've kind of been demoted at the FBI. But I think there's some Republicans that are really pushing for this bias. When it came to Hillary Clinton, they interviewed FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe yesterday about it. So I think there's a difference. You know, you have political opinions. I have them, you have them, but you can't let them interfere in your work. So I think the FBI is going to be working to make sure that no one has that belief that, you know, just because we have political opinions, they're not affecting how I work or how I investigate or how I do my job.
Sure. And like I said, these are situations that have been making headlines. But of course, on the side note, for your average American, they're watching the stock market doing pretty well. Americans are watching the tax reform situation. So do you think the whole situation with the Russia probe is something that Americans are thinking about? Do they impact average Americans?
I think it's something in the back of their head, but I think it's also one of those things where it kind of already happened. So it's almost like let's figure out what happened during it, let's deal with the results, and then almost move on. I think people care about the Russia meddling in the election because obviously elections happen all the time. That's something that's important. But in terms of the Russia investigation and even collusion with the Trump campaign, I think people are like, maybe it happened. Let's see kind of what happens, but they're not thinking about it 24/7. They're thinking about that tax break. They're thinking about the holidays. They're thinking about the government shutdown we just avoided today. So it's there, but it's not something that they're talking about 24/7. At least that's what I get.
Sure, and at the very least, Republicans are going to be fielding questions for it within the next year.
Yeah.
Kelly Cohen, criminal justice reporter at the Washington Examiner. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
A White House senior advisor who's Catholic says President Trump feels very strongly about helping the pro-life community, and we can expect more action from him in 2018. White House correspondent Mark Irons brings us his one-on-one interview covering everything from immigration reform to the president's unconventional tweets.
Thank you for joining me. President's Senior Advisor for Strategic Communications, Mercedes Schlapp. I want to ask you, the President has a lot of critics when it comes to his communication style, say with his use of Twitter. As his Senior Advisor, what kind of advice are you giving the President on getting his message out there?
Well, the President has to be the President, and that is one thing. He likes to be transparent and direct to the American people. He's a fighter. It's what he's done.
One big concern for Catholics are pro-life issues. Looking back at 2017, the President appointed conservative justices. He reinstated the Mexico City policy. What pro-life actions are we looking for the President to take in 2018?
Well, clearly the President feels very strongly in helping the pro-life community, as we saw in his Supreme Court Justice pick Neil Gorsuch, as well as picking over 12 and confirming circuit court judges, which is actually a record high of any presidential administration. So clearly what we've seen this year has been a lot of action. We'll see more next year. I think the key is we've seen him reinstate the Mexico City policy and dramatically expand it. And also with the judges, the conservative judges, that is critical in helping to shift and move away from judicial activism, which we know has been detrimental to our country.
You're a Cuban American. You may know the struggles of immigrant families well. What advice are you giving the President when it comes to the Dreamers?
Well, I think as the President said in terms of DACA, that these are, he's about being compassionate. At the same time, we need to ensure that we have an immigration system that works, and that will require border security and interior enforcement. It is important to close the loopholes. We have these cases where there's backlogs, where judges aren't able to process immigration cases, and our border patrols don't have enough resources to process what's happening in the border. So there are these stark realities. Let's do immigration in a way where you allow for legal immigrants to come in the right way and not continue to advocate for illegal immigration that, as we know, is detrimental to our national security.
The President just got a big win on tax reform. When he returns to the White House after the break, what's the first thing he's going to work on?
Well, clearly the President will be working with Congress. I think one of the bigger issues that they're going to be dealing with is ensuring that we continue on this strong economic growth to ensure that we have job creation in our country. So there are three buckets to that. One is tax cuts. The other one is deregulation. We've already seen the President take action in those two areas. The third bucket is infrastructure. That's one of the areas where both Democrats and Republicans can find common ground. We're going to have state and local governments involved and being incentivized, that we are able to reinvest in our infrastructure and also invest in our resources, the most valuable resource, that being the American people.
As a Catholic working in the White House, how does your faith inspire your work?
I'm very blessed and honored to work for President Trump, and I feel very much that prayer is a very important part of my life. Every day I walk in, I pray for wisdom and guidance in what I do every day in serving this president and, more importantly, serving the American people.
The President's Senior Advisor for Strategic Communications, Mercedes Schlapp, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Vice President Mike Pence points to progress made in Afghanistan during a surprise visit to the troops before Christmas. Pence's unannounced trip is the first to the war-ravaged country by either President Trump or the Vice President. The administration is seeking to stabilize the country by strengthening Afghan forces and seeking a conclusion to the 16-year war. The Vice President says the U.S. has put ISIS on the defensive. At least 29 are dead after a fire in a commercial building in South Korea. Heavy smoke charred the sides of the glass building as flames spread overnight. Firefighters were able to rescue several people, but officials warn the death toll could rise. Spain's prime minister will have to face some tough decisions after pro-independence parties win a majority of the parliament in Catalonia. Today, Mariano Rajoy dismissed a call to meet with a former Catalan politician who led the region's push for independence. The prime minister did say he expects, quote, a new era based on dialogue as long as the leaders abide by the law. Catalonia voted to leave Spain in October, but the Spanish government says the referendum was illegal. Pope Francis meets with the new U.S. ambassador to the Holy See, Callista Gingrich. She presented her credential letters to the Holy Father, making her appointment official. The new ambassador was nominated by President Trump last May and confirmed by the Senate in October. Her husband, former Speaker Newt Gingrich, also was present today. As Christmas approaches, it's a busy time everywhere. It's especially true at the Vatican, where Pope Francis has a packed schedule. The Pope will make public appearances on 3 consecutive days, starting with Mass on Christmas Eve. He already has received numerous gifts, including a nativity scene from Lithuania's government. Juliet Lindley is EWTN News Nightly's Vatican correspondent. She joins us now from Rome. Juliet, what are Pope Francis' plans for Christmas?
Wyatt, the octave of Christmas is indeed a very busy period for Pope Francis. Now, Christmas Eve, he'll be saying Mass in St. Peter's Basilica. It actually is a midnight Mass, but it doesn't start at midnight. It starts at 9:30. Probably because we all need to be well rested for the following day, and indeed he, on Christmas Day, will give the Urbi et Orbi message, and it's what you could almost call a State of the Nation speech, in which he looks at different situations around the world and often touches on the topic of persecution of Christians. And the day after Christmas, on St. Stephen's Day, he prays the Angelus in St. Peter's. Now, during that period, the Pope will also at some point probably meet with Pope Emeritus Benedict to exchange Christmas greetings.
Pope Francis always seems to have a busy schedule. How then will he be ringing in the new year?
Now, on New Year's Eve, traditionally, he celebrates the Angelus in the morning, and then at 5 o'clock in St. Peter's Basilica, he will pray the Te Deum and Vespers, giving thanks for the year that has just gone by. And after the Mass, he always goes into St. Peter's Square and he visits the nativity scene that is there next to the giant Christmas tree.
Seems very appropriate, of course. Juliet, tell us about the atmosphere in Rome right now. What is it like there this time of year?
I guess like in most cities around the world, it's extremely hectic. There's so much traffic. You can hear beeping of horns in the background as I speak. And you know, people are doing their last minute shopping. I'm actually rather grateful that I commute to work by bike because traffic is crazy. It would take me ages to get home otherwise. But people are running around also seeing the Christmas plays that their children are doing in the schools, which is a bit of a reminder that we are actually celebrating the birth of Jesus, as well as buying those typical Italian Christmas buns with raisins in them called panettoni. Wyatt.
Sure, and I know things can seem pretty elaborate in Rome, so we appreciate your taking us there. Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent. Merry Christmas, Juliet.
Merry Christmas to you, Wyatt. Thank you.
The Knights of Columbus is giving a 30-day supply of food to 12,000 displaced or formerly displaced Christian families in northern Iraq to coincide with Christmas. Valued at more than $800,000, the Christmas baskets contain food such as wheat, rice, meat, beans, and meat. We thank the Knights of Columbus, of course, for their support of EWTN News Nightly as well. The Holy Father's top diplomat in Peru says the country is excited for the Pope's upcoming trip, and his message to them will be clear.
Pope Francis will bring to Peru, will bring to all of us a message of unity. We need to strengthen unity in our beloved country of Peru. A unity, and we need also hope.
The Holy Father will visit Peru and Chile from January 15th to the 22nd. Coming up, in their defense, a Trump administration official uses strong words on the issue of abortion for undocumented minors. And the Vatican's nativity scene. We take you on a tour of this year's Christmas creche in St. Peter's Square. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. A Trump administration official who oversees the agency sheltering immigrant minors says abortion and rape are forms of violence. In a memo released Thursday, Scott Lloyd, head of the Office of Refugee Resettlement at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, also says, quote, to decline to assist in an abortion is to decline to participate in violence against an innocent life. Planned Parenthood says new laws in Arkansas may leave only one clinic where women can have an abortion. It adds the new rules are, quote, part of a broader political agenda to end the procedure locally. Arkansas is one of 8 states where physicians who administer abortion pills must work with a doctor with admitting privileges to a hospital. Lawmakers say the legislation is meant to protect women's health. The family that prays together stays together. It's a phrase we've heard or seen countless times, but where did it originate? From now a venerable Catholic priest who had a star-studded group of friends. Father Patrick Peyton, a longtime radio personality in the U.S., was born in Ireland in 1909. As a seminarian in the 1930s, he became seriously ill and credited the rosary for his recovery. From then on, he was known as the Rosary Priest. He also was friends with movie stars of the day, including Jack Benny and Lucille Ball. Earlier this week, Pope Francis declared him venerable, 2 steps from sainthood. And now via Skype, we're joined by Father Willie Raymond, who knew the Rosary Priest. Father Willie, your path crossed with Father Peyton as both of you belong to the Holy Cross congregation. I understand, in fact, you had a special conversation with him at a retreat one time. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. It was right after I was ordained in 1971, and we had a retreat, an annual retreat in June. And while we were on retreat, I was sitting next to him at lunch. All of a sudden, in a quiet moment, he reached over, he had a big hand, he put it over mine, and he said, young father, you're a new priest. I believe that the Blessed Mother is calling you to work in Family Rosary. And I was very moved by that and flattered that he even knew who I was, because he was this famous world-renowned figure, and I, that was a great moment, and it was modified a little bit for me, because I found out that he went to several of my classmates and said the same thing to them as well. So he was not shy about recruiting Holy Cross religious priest brothers to work with him.
Sure. Well, of course, as you know, Father Peyton reached out to so many people, especially through the radio. Of course, he reached people worldwide with his message of peace and unity. How did his use of the radio, do you think, helped preach the praying of the Rosary?
You know, it was amazing, because right after he was ordained in 1941, he was still recovering from his illness, so they gave him light duty, and he was stationed in Albany, New York, as a chaplain to the Holy Cross Brothers, and while he was there, he had a chance to be on radio, and he had a small segment, a daily segment, and he used that to reach others. And then in 1945, he had an opportunity to do a national broadcast on Mother's Day.
It is incredible how many people Father Peyton was able to reach. You know, being declared venerable by Pope Francis is one step closer to sainthood for the Irish priest. What is being done now in your community to help promote his beatification, which is the next step towards sainthood?
Well, you know, since we got the news, we sent out that news as soon as we were allowed to speak publicly about it to Congregation of Holy Cross all around the world, and also to the offices of Holy Cross Family Ministries, which are all Family Rosary in various countries. We're on 5 continents and 16 countries outside the United States, and we've had an incredible response. A lot of the Holy Cross religious are just very happy that this has happened to someone that many of us knew personally.
Father Willie Raymond, Congregation of the Holy Cross, thanks so much for talking with us about him.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much. God bless and Merry Christmas.
A donation from a Michigan businessman will lead to expansion at the center dedicated to Blessed Solanus Casey. Art Van Elslander is giving $20 million to help the Solanus Center in Detroit add much-needed parking and expand its campus. Father Solanus, who spent more than 20 years working in the Motor City, was officially declared blessed last month. That's one step away from sainthood. Up next, reindeer games. A group in Tokyo continues an unusual tradition.
Merry Christmas! Merry Christmas!
And the Vatican at Christmas. We take you right to St. Peter's Square this Advent.
From all of us at EWTN News Nightly to all of you around the world, Merry Christmas!
Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas! Pope Francis sends a tweet ahead of Christmas. The Holy Father writes, "Let us free Christmas from the worldliness that has taken it hostage. The true spirit of Christmas is the beauty of being loved by God." Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. Before carrying presents all over the world, Santa Claus decides to have a little fun in Tokyo, Japan. It's all part of the 10th annual Santa Claus Parade in the city's business district. It draws around 200 people dressed in costumes. They warmed up for Christmas by handing out small presents and candy. The Christmas creche in St. Peter's Square is a tradition that began in 1982 under Pope John Paul II, but this year's nativity is quintessentially Pope Francis. Our Vatican correspondent Juliette Lindley joins us again with exclusive access.
24 life-size figures are bringing mercy to St. Peter's Square this Christmas. The Vatican creche was handmade this year, and the terracotta characters are dressed in 18th century costumes. They are, in the words of Pope Francis, a reminder of Christ's message, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's a theme the Holy Father constantly highlights, and this year it's front and center.
What the Church wants to put before us, as taken from Jesus, is that we need to prepare ourselves well in this life for that. Something emphasized very much by Pope Francis through acts of charity, through acts of kindness.
The creche comes from nearby Naples, a city with a centuries-long tradition of artisan nativity scenes. It was donated by the Sanctuary of Montevergine, an ancient Benedictine abbey 35 miles east of the city. The 7 corporal works of mercy are depicted this year. They're found in the teachings of Jesus and are a roadmap for Christian life.
We first see, for example, feed the hungry. Give drink to those who are thirsty. And what we see in the figures here, we see a woman who is holding a jug of water, and to the side we see a man who is holding a basket of bread.
The artisans created this elderly lady next to a foreign-looking gentleman specifically as a pointed reference to the current refugee crisis and to Pope Francis's repeated calls that we make greater efforts to embrace migrants.
Another favorite act of mercy of Francis is outreach to prisoners.
But this is a metaphor also for the captivity which we find ourselves in any kind of darkness, in any kind of sin. So we're not simply visiting a person because they're in prison physically, but also spiritually, and we want to take them out of that darkness.
These are all visual reminders the faithful must practice mercy, even as we celebrate the birth of Christ. At the Vatican, Juliette Lindley, EWTN News Nightly.
And back here in the U.S., we've been sharing nativity scenes all week from our viewers. Tonight, we want to share a few from the EWTN News Nightly offices as well. This first one is located in our EWTN newsroom. It's a simple nativity scene with an added Christmas tree that lights up in the background. Editor Tom Dietzig shows us his nativity scene. He tells us his grandkids set the figures this year, and it's quite crowded, as you can see. Capitol Hill producer Susan Bruce shared her family's nativity. And finally, a Peanuts creche from our producer Rodney Harris. Snoopy, of course, acts as a sheep, Charlie Brown as Joseph, and Lucy as Mary. And that's our show for this week. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll have special programming next Monday and Tuesday, but we're back on Wednesday with more news from a Catholic perspective. We hope you have a safe and joyful Christmas. Good night, and God bless.